Hello and welcome to you all from the National Museums of Scotland for an event which I hope is going to catch some of the excitement that awaits visitors when the doors are finally opened once again. We'll be talking about one of the most remarkable acquisitions of recent times and revealing some of its secrets to you this evening. The Galloway Hoard is the subject of our exploration, with our guides, Dr. Martin Goldberg, Principal Curator of Medieval Archaeology and History at the Museum, and Michael Hirst, creator and writer of Vikings, the award-winning and hugely popular TV series that has opened a door to many millions around the world on an era which once was rather buried in the popular imagination. And we'll investigate the hoard itself, there lying undisturbed in southwest Scotland for more than 1,000 years until it was discovered in 2014. I'm James Naughtie, and I'm going to be your guide through this. And it's going to be an evening, I think, of surprises all round and a glimpse of some of the really remarkable treasures. And as we explore them, the National Museums are taking their events online, all of them, so that they can continue to share all their latest research with you. And I hope you'll be able to tune in and follow that. We hope that over the coming months, you can join us in continuing to explore the collections and their fascinating stories from the comfort of your own home. A couple of things about the way this evening will work. If you've got any technical problems during the event, please let us know. Just use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. You all know how to do it by now, and we'll do our best from this end to assist you. The event is being recorded by the museum, but you can rest assured that your own cameras and microphones, as a useful guarantee, will be switched off throughout, so you are safe. The event includes live captioning, and if you want to switch that on, just click on the CC button on the menu below. Now, there is going to be an opportunity later for the last 20 minutes or so of this 1-hour session to ask questions. Please do type your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen as the event progresses. We'll first begin with a presentation from Martin Goldberg, and then we'll be joined by Michael Hirst from Vikings before you can all join in. So it's going to be a conversation which I think you will find enlightening and indeed exciting. There are more than 100 diverse objects in the hoard, which was buried sometime at the beginning of the 10th century in Dumfries and Galloway in southwest Scotland and discovered by a metal detectorist in September 2014. Now, it brings together what is unquestionably the richest collection of rare and unique Viking-age objects ever found in Britain or Ireland, and one that is bound to transform our understanding of this period of the history of these islands, particularly in Scotland. Silver, gold, jewelled treasure, and extraordinarily, textiles that have somehow survived, including wool and linen, and the earliest examples of silkwork that we've ever found in Scotland. The hoard was allocated to the National Museums of Scotland in 2017, when a selection of items did go on display, as some of you will know, as part of a fundraising campaign, a very successful one, to save it for the nation, with very generous public support and an intensive programme of conservation and research, which of course is still going on. The myriad secrets of the hoard have been and are being uncovered. That will go on into the future. At the time, Martin Goldberg, who's with us tonight, said, quite simply, nothing like this has ever been found in Scotland before. So I'm very happy to hand over to Martin now, who will give us a look over the next quarter of an hour or so at the hoard itself. Martin.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome. The easiest way to think about the Galloway hoard is a simple split between a mass of silver bullion and a range of other unusual objects and rare materials that are quite unlike any other Viking Age hoard. While the silver is what we might expect, there is much that is unexpected. The hoard was buried in distinct parcels or groups, and this includes what seems to be a decoy layer at the top, separated from a much richer deposit underneath and hidden by what looked like natural gravel. The thing you should bear in mind is that at every turn there is something unusual or distinct about the Galloway hoard. Even that top layer of bullion had an unusual addition, a richly decorated Christian cross with a delicate chain wrapped around it, showing that it had been recently worn on the chest. Here is the first view of what the hoard looked like in the ground when it was discovered. So this is silver bullion, including ingots and flattened, bent and hacked arm rings. And top right, you can see that cross face down with the fine silver spiral chain wrapped around it. The bullion is often carefully measured to standardized weights. There are large bar-shaped ingots here, and some are exactly ½ pound in weight. The arm rings are called Hiberno-Scandinavian broadband arm rings, which is a rather long-winded way for archaeologists to describe them. But the name tells you what the map shows you, that the distribution of these arm rings provides the context that that name describes. So this is Scandinavian interaction in the 9th century AD in Ireland and around the Irish Sea. And then hoards found in North Wales and North England tell us the same thing. The Galloway hoard is the second largest hoard containing these arm rings. And the arm rings have a currency of between AD 880 and 930. So this is a 50-year time span. And this makes the Galloway hoard Scotland's earliest Viking-age hoard. Here is the pectoral cross recently after it was discovered. It would have been worn with that fine spiral chain suspending it from the neck, but it was wrapped around it when it was buried. This cross has become the most suitable icon of our work revealing the hoard. The objects have been transformed through the conservation process, and our understanding of the hoard is being transformed at the same time. So this is an afternoon's work, speeded up for you. This is time-lapse footage, so a photograph is being taken every 30 seconds and it's speeded up to show you the first arm of the cross being revealed. This is the work of our specialist conservator, Dr. Mary Davis. The cross is unusual for a Viking-age hoard because it's both a Christian object, but it's also decorated in a distinct late Anglo-Saxon art style. There are multiple materials being used. It's inlaid with niello and gold. It's finely carved, and the design is dominated by the Christian symbols of the 4 evangelists who wrote the Gospels. It's recently worn, but it's being damaged. There is something missing from the center of it. But the big question is it plunder? Is this object part of the stereotype that we would expect of a Viking hoard? Or is this throwing us off the trail of a much richer and more interesting history revealed through the Galloway hoard? So beneath that top decoy layer was a lower, richer layer. And it has 3 parts: more silver bullion, an arm ring cluster with some gold objects, and a silver gilt vessel. There's more than twice as much bullion in the lower layer as there was in the top layer, and it's composed of very similar material. It's mostly the same type of Hiberno-Scandinavian broadband arm rings, but here there are 4 clear groups of arm rings that have been flattened and folded in 4 different ways, and one in each of those groups is inscribed with runes. Now, Scandinavian runes are what we would expect in a Viking hoard, but here is where we hit another unusual element. These runes are Anglo-Saxon runes, and they are spelling out Old English words that were commonly used as name elements. So here we seem to have evidence for 4 owners. This looks like a corporate deposit. The arm ring with the longest inscription is twice as large as the rest, and this suggests that these owners were not necessarily equals. But this evidence for 4 owners is quite unusual. It's not what we would expect. There is also another fragment of hack silver, which you see on the right, which is from the wider site, so it wasn't discovered with the hoard. It also has a full name carved on it. The name spells out Egbert, again in Anglo-Saxon runes, but it's a very common Old English name. So these runes are part of the local context. This is a part of a group of late Anglo-Saxon runic inscriptions in what, at the time, during the 9th century AD, was the westernmost part of the Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Northumbria. But zooming out from that local context, the silver that the runes are inscribed on needs to be put into an international context. That international context is the supply of silver that during the Viking Age was extending halfway around the world. So there are three main sources of silver at this time. Anglo-Saxon coinage was being melted down and recycled, made into ingots and arm rings. A second source comes from continental Europe, where the new coinage of the Carolingian or the Holy Roman Empire was also being used in Viking Age hoards. But thirdly, and most distant, are Islamic silver coins that are part of long-distance Scandinavian trade, which is mediated through Russian river systems and trade routes that connect the Baltic with the Black and Caspian Seas, and ultimately they connect with the Silk Roads of Central Asia. Now, this may seem like a great distance to cover, but there are other elements in the hoard that tell us similar things. So the silk that is preserved in parts of the Galloway hoard must originate somewhere in Central Asia as well, and there are hints that other items might too. So there is one group of arm rings in the silver that are different to the rest. They are shaped as they would have been worn. Here you can see them when they were first discovered. They are large and they are more elaborately decorated than the broadband arm rings. They're referred to as ribbon arm rings. And here you see them beautifully restored through our conservation process. Again, the work of Dr. Mary Davis. So there are four of them again. One is twice as large as the others. But what is unusual is the way that they are bound together. So although they would have been worn, these have been taken four together and bound up almost like a contract, and again suggesting that this is some sort of corporate deposit. Nestled within that cluster was a small wooden box containing 3 gold items. Gold is much less common in Viking Age hoards. So the Galloway hoard contains more gold than any other Viking Age hoard surviving from Britain and Ireland. Much of that gold is contained in the silver gilt vessel. So finally, it is the vessel and its contents that are the most unusual element to this hoard. The Galloway vessel is different from other vessels used as Viking Age hoard containers. It is complete with its matching decorated lid, and this helped to create amazing preservation conditions for organic materials, both within the vessel, and of course you can see other organic materials preserved on the outside of the vessel as well. So there are multiple ancient objects here, not just the silver gilt vessel and its lid. There are at least 3 different textile objects wrapping the vessel. Another significant difference with other hoards is that all of the silver bullion is outside of the Galloway hoard vessel. What was contained within the vessel is quite unlike any other Viking Age hoard. So the vessel is 10 centimeters wide and 10 centimeters high. It's important to bear that in mind because it was filled to the brim with a surprising amount of material, and this is all carefully packed within. Most things in the vessel had been carefully wrapped, but the evidence for this doesn't always survive well. It survives best where the textiles were in contact with metal, as with the silver frame on this bead pendant. At the top of the vessel is this unusual collection of glass beads, pendants, and curios. Many of them are well worn and old by the time they were wrapped and placed in the vessel. They look like heirlooms. These materials are not as intrinsically valuable as some of the other treasure, but their age and the lives they were part of have given these objects great value to the owner of this collection. The silver brooch hoop that you see in the centre is the only piece of recognisable Hiberno-Scandinavian silver in the vessel. Beneath this were two major groups. One is a collection of Anglo-Saxon metalwork, and you can see that in the bottom half of the picture, unwrapped. Above that are two complex bundles that are composed of organic and inorganic materials. The Anglo-Saxon metalwork is a first for Scotland. These disc brooches are normally found in England. There are pairs of items here, but none are quite identical. The two face brooches are unique to this hoard, and the hinge straps that you see in the centre are also unique, but they are decorated in a very similar style to the cross from the top decoy layer. So these objects flag up the cultural mix that this hoard contains, in the same way that the cross did in the top layer, and the same way that the Anglo-Saxon runes elsewhere in the hoard have done. The sealed conditions within the vessel preserved these two complex organic bundles, and our next phase of research is to identify and preserve these textile objects and the associated gold items. On the right-hand side is a rock crystal jar within a silk-lined leather pouch. This is perhaps a perfume jar. Now, these are unique and unusual objects, and there are multiple aspects for research that we will be following. The silk, for example, will be Asian in origin, but figuring out exactly where is one target for our future research. On the left-hand side is a bundle of silken cord, probably a composite object that also contains 3 gold fittings. So these objects have been identified based on X-ray and CT scanning. They show the gold clearly, that's the bright things you can see, but it seems to be the silken cord that is the key feature. Perhaps this was some sort of elaborate belt set with gold fittings, and this is one of the things we hope to figure out in the future. Interspersed within these bundles are other gold objects, a pendant, a twisted rod, and an ingot. The black stone in the pendant is not a gemstone. Although it has been treated like a jewel, it is a more common type of stone, a schist, but it is how this object was used that makes it special. So our examination has revealed streaks of precious metals that are preserved on the surface of the black stone, and these tell us it was a touchstone. Touchstones were used for trade or metalworking to assess the quality of precious metals like gold. This pendant was also strung on silk cord, and there are small gold clips that allow the golden cap to be taken off, and the stone can then be removed. But like so much else in the hoard, this touchstone has been specially treated. It's almost like a relic or an heirloom in its beautiful gold filigree decorated case. Nestled at the base of the vessel are the fragments of many textiles which we will be identifying and reassociating with the groups that they were within the vessel. We will be able to test these textiles for decoration and dye, perhaps reconstructing lost colours or learn something of their origin. We will be able to radiocarbon date these and get a picture of how the hoard was assembled and accumulated through time, perhaps over several lifetimes. To the right is the final unusual feature, dirt balls. So the big question is, what is special about this dirt? They must have been precious in some way because they are carefully curated and nestled amongst these most valuable and exotic materials. Our analysis has shown that these aren't any old dirt balls. They contain tiny particles of gold and shattered bone, and this allows us to pursue a theory that they were contact relics, earthen relics that came from holy shrines that were brought back by pilgrims from their travels. And so the next question is, what shrine? Can we use soil or isotope or chemical analysis to figure out where this dirt originates from? So There is much still to learn, but perhaps the lesson so far is, with the Galloway Hoard, we should expect the unexpected. Thank you very much.
Martin, thank you so much for that tantalizing glimpse of what lay in the ground in Dumfries and Galloway until it was discovered, nearly 7 years ago, after lying there for 1,000 years. And I should say to all of you, and I know there are more than 1,000 of you watching, that you can ask questions. We'll be coming to you all later, and we'll do our best to touch on one of the two questions that seem to be predominant among you. Just use the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen to do that. And I should say also that you can see yourselves the hoard up close when it is exhibited at the National Museum of Scotland in Edinburgh, which will be later this year at a date to be announced. Obviously, that depends on the question of when the museum can open safely. It's going to be generously supported by Baillie Gifford. Entry is going to be free. You may have to pre-book, of course, but it will be free entry. And after the initial display at the National Museum of Scotland, the hoard is going to move on to the Kirkcudbright Galleries, near its home, so to speak, in the southwest, and then next year on to Aberdeen. So it's going to move around a little bit once we get going. Now, of course, this raises the question, and Martin's touched on it, the fascination that we have as we learn more and more about this period. Now, who better to introduce now than Michael Hirst, creator, writer, and producer of that Emmy Award-winning television series Vikings. He's had a long career in television with all sorts of other wonderful stuff, you know, the Tudors and so on. But it's the Vikings that we'll talk about tonight. It's entertained, it's estimated, more than 500 million viewers in a couple of hundred countries. It was the #1 scripted series ever on the History Channel. So it's been hugely popular. And Michael, as we say, good evening to you. You've brought this early medieval world to global TV viewers. Now, we all grew up talking of these periods as the Dark Ages. I mean, the most terrible misnomer imaginable, as we've just seen from that glimpse of the hoard. When you look at that, you must realize again what the spark is that for you as a writer has captured so many people. It is so fascinating to go back a millennium.
Yes, and good evening, James and everyone. Yes, I felt very much that my intention when I started thinking about and writing Vikings was to redeem hundreds of years of prejudice and cliche. I still remember that when I started the process, when I was commissioned to write, which is in about 2011, the Vikings were still considered, in modern parlance, extremely horrible. In fact, I was told by colleagues, several people, that it was quite impossible for me to write a drama about the Vikings because they were the other. They were the people who came and stormed into your house and stole and raped and slaughtered. And I thought, well, yes, this is, this is a commonly held view, obviously. I want to challenge it. And it was a view, of course, that was formed out of ignorance. That people thought they knew things about the Vikings, and by and large, they didn't know very much. They didn't know about Viking culture, about Viking religion, about paganism, which fascinated me. They didn't know about the Viking legal system, all their wonderful technologies. So, I thought I had a good chance of getting people slightly more engaged, slightly more sympathetic, slightly more attracted to Viking culture. And the second thing was that I wanted to show that actually Vikings were human beings. And that Viking husbands loved their wives and Viking parents loved their children. And so it was no surprise, if I can just quickly finish, that the first two scenes in the show, the first one is the end of a battle scene. And this was deliberate because history was a male-skewed channel, and the audience, the large part of the audience, would expect to see something visceral. The second scene was a family scene with Ragnar and his children and his wife, his child and his wife. And that was deliberate. And I wanted people to feel, right, we're going on a journey here into a culture and society you don't know anything about.
Martin, you're joining us for this discussion. The reference to culture there, I mean, we saw in your presentation, several of the remarkable things that came out of the hoard, which had been suspected or known roughly, but were given a new depth and color by what you found. One of them, I think people will be struck by, was the breadth of the cultural background which these people were bringing or helping to bring to this country, where they traveled to and so on. Let me take you back to 2017 when you first saw what had been discovered. You're a man who deals with ancient objects and ancient things. It's your trade. What was your reaction when you saw this?
Disbelief, and it still is, because the material in the hoard, I can't say it too many times, it's quite unlike anything else that we'd seen before. So the material in the hoard, there is the silver, which you would expect for the Viking age, but it's all of the other materials that really make it stand out. And yeah, the different cultures coming together, things like the gold bird pin that really capture people's imagination. It's such an evocative image. But really, it's the contents of the vessel itself that make it very unusual. And the vessel too, although we thought we knew what it was when we started the research, it is also changed in our understanding, especially over the last year.
I think what's interesting about this is that, Michael, you fictionally are trying to create a network of families and, power structures, if you like, to use a pretty awful contemporary phrase. And Martin, what you're trying to do is not jump the gun and say, well, this proves that they were like this or that, but to try very, very carefully to look at the probabilities of what they tell us about what people left each other, what they valued, and how they interacted. I mean, I assume you have to do that with great care.
Yes, completely. And it's the care and the time that it takes to get this information, and the modern techniques that are available. And each new bit of information is adding something to the story. But also at this stage of the research, we have to sort of consider multiple stories, multiple possibilities. It opens up all sorts of different worlds to us.
Well, Michael, of course, has the advantage of being able to make it up. But I know he's very, very careful with his historical research and by bouncing things off people who've spent half a lifetime looking at these things. So you're very conscious, Michael, that you will talk about what it may have been like, but you will stick with what we know.
Well, everything that I wrote began life in research. I work with a historical researcher. He has access to academics in Cambridge and other universities. And I did a lot of research myself. I have an academic background. But the first thing I would ask, if I came up with a storyline, I would ask my historical advisor, first of all, is it plausible? Is it plausible? So that would be the first test. The second test is actually, does it seem authentic to you? I'm not inventing anything. I'm not inventing.
Does it ring true?
Yes. Does it ring true? Exactly. Which is actually the third trick. Does it ring true to you? I just don't. There is no point in making things up for effect, because if you can't persuade people, that the audience, that this is actually about real people, then you failed. And this was very important. So of course you want to, as a writer, you want to entertain. That's your job. Or they'll cancel the show. But at the same time, I did want to take people into another world in which, for example, their pagan faith was not an app. It wasn't added on to their daily life. It was intrinsic to their lives. So the conflict between paganism and Christianity is fundamental to the show. And I wanted to show in both cases how much it influenced and was embedded in the daily and ordinary lives of everybody on either side. So I had characters who were curious, one or two characters who were curious about the other religion and asked questions.
Well, it's a curiosity, a sheer chance. It was found on Church of Scotland land, strangely enough, in southwest Scotland. But Martin, you pointed out that pectoral cross and that, an extraordinary bit of silver work with that chain which appeared to have been wrapped around it. And that absolutely engrossing mixture of what we call, just to use the simple term, paganism and Christianity in Scotland, I mean, is one of the great things that you can probe, because the research into this is going to go on the rest of your life, isn't it?
Yes, I think so. Maybe not my research, but it will be research done by lots of other people. The amount of material in the hoard opens up all sorts of opportunities for all sorts of different types of researchers. So there are the runic inscriptions that we can have runologists look at. The textiles require particular skills in textile analysis. There are people who study just silver, and we're working with a team at the University of Oxford who are doing that. The textile specialists that we're working with are based at the University of Glasgow. So there's a whole range of things that we can do. Fortunately, it's not all just me.
And we're seeing, as we talk, we're seeing images of some of the objects coming up, particularly that wonderful pin of the bird. Now, I think that somebody's insisting, I mean, you're not an ornithologist, that it is a flamingo, which of course, yeah, there it is, absolutely wonderful piece of jewelry, which is, has got a contemporary beauty about it. Where would they have seen a flamingo? I mean, of course, they were all over the place, Michael, as we know, North Africa or...
Yeah. In the hoard, there are things which are clearly there, not just because they're valuable, they have intrinsic value, they're beautiful, so I think there was an aesthetic sensibility as well. So, these are time capsules, these hoards are time capsules of extraordinary importance. The benediction exerted by objects is very real in these cases. But could I just say one of the things that,
of course,
as a writer, always fascinated me, and it may not be true, but as a storyteller, as a writer, this interested me. Okay, so in Christian culture, rich people had to divest themselves of a lot of their wealth, and they gave it to monasteries and religious houses as a way of being able to enter heaven. And these religious houses were not full of soldiers guarding these treasures, they were full of monks, unarmed monks. So the Vikings just stepped in there to Lindisfarne or wherever it was and took a lot of these beautiful, wonderful gold, silver objects. And you just thought, okay, now they're rich. They can go and spend this stuff. But no, they bury them in the earth. And one of the reasons they bury in the earth is because in the sagas, Odin tells them that when they're in Valhalla, they can spend them.
Well, now this, I mean, we're getting into, I suppose, deep water, but it's absolutely fundamental. Martin, do you have any conception as to the likely explanation as to why the hoard was buried as it was? I mean, you can't just invent a story. There might have been some conflagration or something, but what kind of explorations into the purpose have you been able to make?
Well, people always want that story of what happened on that day. And that's one of the hardest things to reconstruct. You would need very particular types of evidence and very particular forensic techniques, modern forensic techniques, to be able to reconstruct what happened on the day. The best chance of getting to what happened on the day is in the detail of the hoard itself, but also the surrounding site. So there will be information that could be gained from an excavation of the site, and that's the context that allows us to extrapolate out and think about what happened at that time in that place,
but carefully, because you don't want to start jumping to conclusions that take people up a blind alley or unwittingly down a wrong path.
Well, when you said this is going to take the rest of my life, so we're only, it's only a couple of years into it, really. And what we need to do with something of this complexity is think about every individual object and try and understand every object first, and then start to think about the groups within that I described, and then start to think about the hoard itself, why it was buried, look at the site, and then you start to range out, looking at the wider context, what's happening in Galloway at this particular time, what's happening in the wider Irish Sea area, what's happening between Britain and Scandinavia. And then ultimately, the real joy of this hoard is that the objects take you out halfway around the world, you know, into a much bigger world that's telling you about international connections and how Scotland was connected to the rest of the world at that particular time.
Michael,
can I add
yes,
to that?
Absolutely.
Because, it's amazing to me, and it's wonderful that people now are really, really deeply interested in Vikings and Viking culture. It's absolutely wonderful, because it wasn't true, as I say, when I started at work. And one of the things that was very interesting to me was that I got an invitation to the Viking Boat Museum in Oslo to go around it. I should have gone earlier, but I went 3 or 4 years ago, and I got a private viewing, which was very nice. And I said, why? And the curator said, it's a thank you. He said, since your show has been on the air, we've got twice the number of people coming to visit the museum. We're going to be able to double the size. We've also been able to send out more archaeological expeditions to dig for more things. He said, but there's another thing too. At the end of the so-called Viking-age, all of Scandinavia was Christianized. And all that remained of paganism was destroyed. Most of it was wooden, of course, was destroyed, and stone churches were built on the sites. And Scandinavians had a very mixed feeling about their history, their own history. In some ways, they wanted to forget about the pagan history, because we go back to this idea that paganism was bad and Vikings were horrible. Okay, so you don't want to be remembered. He said, you and other people, you know, to do with your show and other shows that are coming along, have made Scandinavians reassess their own history. And they're proud of it. Generally speaking, now they come to the museum to look at it in renewed numbers. And that's so amazing and wonderful. And if I did anything else, that would have been the proudest thing that I'd done.
It's interesting that you talk about a series that probably got some energy that perhaps you hadn't even expected. I mean, most writers are optimistic about what they do, and they hope, you know, in television terms, that a show will keep running. But to see it grow and grow and grow, in a way, Martin, what you're seeing at the museum, even in these tantalizing glimpses which people have had, and then we're going through this awful period at the moment before they can see it in all its glory, you must be sensing a real stirring of interest as you continue, as I imagine you do, to uncover new facts, new images, really, from, you know, hidden, particularly in the textiles, which are so extraordinary. Are you constantly throwing up something new?
Well, we're certainly trying to. And we've been awarded research funding recently. And I think that's a testament to the continued interest. So there was an amazing response from the public when we were doing the fundraising. And I think it was the level of detail, the things that are in this hoard that capture the imagination. The public seemed to really respond to that. And so we'll be able to continue that research. And I suppose what people are seeing is a glimpse behind the scenes. You know, they're seeing, there is always a premise, like Michael said earlier, there is a cliche of a Viking hoard. And I think what we're trying to do is consider the multiple stories, the things that the hoard can tell us. And it's only going to give those things up, you know, very, very difficult. It's going to require time and effort. And that, as long as we can keep feeding that information and keep telling people new things, then I think the interest in this hoard will remain.
And as we bring in people who've been watching and joined us this evening, Michael, for questions, which we'll do in just a moment. Just briefly, it's interesting that Martin has talked about this as a journey of exploration in a scientific, archaeological sense, where new things are being discovered all the time. A new interpretation of a piece of inscription or something will continue to throw up new insights. It's actually like the development of a story, isn't it? It's the same process.
I began to realize that after a certain time that this was my saga, that it was based on other sagas. It was based on historical research, but it was essentially my saga, the story of this man and his sons, essentially. And there were a large part of it that I didn't know what was going to happen next. So the information would come, like the Viking attack on Paris. When I started, I didn't know that had happened. That most extraordinary event, absolutely mind-blowing. And so there were revelations. It was like looking into the hoard. There was revelation after revelation.
Well, and those are going to continue to come. Now, questions have been flowing in from, many, many people who've been watching and I hope enjoying what they've heard from both of you. And I'm just going to select some of them. Obviously, we can't even begin to give everyone a chance. But here's one, for example, from Kate Foster. It's a very basic question, but I think many people will want to hear it answered, Martin. You can just tell us something very briefly about where it was found and what the specific location suggested about where it might have come from, how it got there.
Well, there was a site context. So there was a building. There was a short archaeological investigation after the hoard was discovered. And there is features that were planned, and there is definitely a building there. And this in itself is quite unusual for a hoard. Many of the things that were discovered in the Victorian period, the hoards that we have in the museum, don't have that level of information available. So that's something that we would hope to look at in the future. There is a PhD that's based at the University of Glasgow at the moment that's looking at the surrounding area in terms of the Galloway region, because when something like this is discovered, it allows you to reassess all that we think we know already. And that's what I mean about new stories, multiple stories. It's like getting a sort of new set of historical documents. An archaeological discovery like this allows you to think anew about an area, about Scotland, about the international context.
I'll bring Michael in on that in a second. But some people are asking, of course, about the care that you have to take to avoid destruction, because you want to uncover things at the same time you want to destroy and don't want to destroy information that might be valuable. And Mariana Bach asks, just beyond that, really, is it possible to use DNA at all on the textiles or indeed on the silver? I mean, is there any possibility of getting anywhere with that? And if so, what would it tell us?
Well, there is all sorts of scientific techniques that we will be able to apply. And like you said, it's a fine balance. Some of these techniques at the moment are destructive. So things like radiocarbon dating, you still have to, although it's the size of the sample has decreased as the technique has improved, you still have to destroy a tiny bit to get that bit of information. And as a curator, it's a very fine balance. We're always trying to think about what we can learn now, but also we need to have an eye to the future, preserving as much as we can, because we really don't know what sort of techniques we'll be able to apply in the future. Archaeology is always borrowing techniques that are developed in other disciplines and then applying them to the material from the past.
Michael, someone anonymously just says that the silk items are particularly interesting to him or to her, showing the international connections. I mean, as far as Martin pointed out, through the Black Sea, Caspian Sea to the Silk Road. I mean, that whole internationalization of the Vikings in the popular mind. I mean, we know the Romans were everywhere. Everywhere, but they were in a lot of places. But people haven't associated the Vikings. Perhaps they've heard that maybe they got to what we call North America, but they've thought of it as a warlike conquest rather than...
Yes, and raiders, essentially raiders. most of them were farmers as well, as well as raiders for that reason. But I didn't know that Russia is called Russia because it was founded by the Rus Vikings in Kiev. I didn't realize just how effective they were at spreading themselves and their DNA around the world. And when History Channel said to me, when we were selling it to them, said, well, what's it to do with us? In America, we were in New York, I said, just walk around the block, 3 blocks, something, you'll find 100 people with Viking DNA. I mean, I grew up near York in Yorkshire, and that was a Viking town. We shot the show in just outside Dublin, which is a Viking town, so can I just very quick, very quick, I know you've got that.
No.
Because I don't know anything about the science. I've been so fascinated. It's wonderful. I was invited to join an archaeological dig during the course of shooting, which was in the Mercian capital. There was a well-known Viking encampment there, and they were digging, and they'd found a place that looked very promising. And I went down, and I was kind of showboating, I suppose. But I put on the right gear, and I was digging around for about half an hour, and I found something. And I thought they were digging up a lot of ship's nails. And it was metal. And I said to the professor who was leading I said, I think I found a ship's nail. And he looked at it, he said, no, I think it's part of a Viking arrowhead, which is extraordinary because we've only ever found 5 Viking arrowheads in England, found lots in Scotland or Ireland or whatever. Yeah. And he said, that's remarkable. So I was digging away. About 20 more minutes later, I found a perfect example of a Viking arrowhead. And this time he wasn't quite so congratulatory. And he came over and he said, Michael, I've been doing archaeological digs for about 40 years. I have never found a Viking arrowhead. You have been here about an hour and 30 minutes. You have now found 2.
Yeah. Well, there we are. It puts everyone, Martin, in their place. Someone is asking about the inscriptions, particularly on the arm rings. Andrew McQuaid says, is there any significance to the patterns that you found? You're working in the dark in many ways, because I suppose there are things you can compare them with, but at the same time, they've got unique characteristics. Where are you on that journey of exploration?
That's again going to be one of our targets over the next 3 years. Is we will have somebody looking particularly at the silver arm rings. So there are hundreds of these in other hoards. The map that I showed the scatter of them. There's a lot of them in Ireland. The funny thing about the ones in the Galloway Hoard is each one looks individual. We haven't found any repetition of pattern. They may have used the same tool in some cases, but they've always done an individual patterning of them. And, there's quite a lot of arm rings there. You would expect a bit more repetition. But I think it tells you something about the individuals, the people. And that's what we're always trying to do with the objects, is get to the people. That's what Michael's line of work does so well, is it brings people's ancient lives, to our screens.
It's also,
I guess what we're trying to do is the same with objects.
A lot of viewers are asking us, what the theories are about how the hoard got to be where it is. And obviously, like any reputable academic, you're not going to try to jump to some conclusion just because it sounds nice. On the other hand, the fact that you make, the point that you make about different inscriptions being in different objects, to a lay person would suggest that they were selected to be some sort of, collection. I mean, it wasn't like a set of, cutlery for a family dinner. I mean, they were all different. Have you come to any preliminary thoughts about why they were put together in this vessel?
Well, like I said, there's the cliche. It's a Viking hoard. It's plunder, But I think if you start off with that premise in mind, that's going to be the only story you end up with. So what we're trying to do is consider the multiple reasons, the multiple different factors that might have gone into this. And there might even be different motivations for why different parts of the hoard were collected in the first place. So that vessel with its lid and all of the unusual materials inside it could have been collected for a completely different purpose to the bullion, which is used in an economic sphere. So there's the potential there that there isn't just one reason that it came together. There might be different stories to different parts of the hoard.
And Martin, from what's known at the moment around this period, how many Vikings were likely to have been in Scotland for one reason or another? I mean, just give us an idea of the presence.
Well, one of the main forms of evidence is place names. So there is a huge amount of place names up the west coast and in the Northern Isles that tell us that there was a substantial population here. You know, when people are naming features of the landscape, they are dominating that landscape. They are naming it. They are controlling it. They're farming it. They're sailing the seas. Scotland has more Viking Norse-style burials than anywhere else in Britain and Ireland. So there is material there, but it's in particular places. A lot of it was excavated many years ago. And that's what I mean about a discovery like this. Allows us to reconsider some of our existing collection. It will allow us to reconsider what was going on in Galloway in the 9th century AD. You know, it opens up all sorts of new ways of looking at Viking Scotland. And also, you know, the Vikings were interacting with other people that were here already. So it's also quite interesting to think about how those societies, kingdoms changed over the course of that period. And I think that's one of the curious elements about the hoard, is it seems to be bringing together different, you know, what we consider cultures, Anglo-Saxon runes, Anglo-Saxon metalwork, what we consider to be Viking-age silver bullion. It's all part of this cultural mix that's going on at the time that makes the period so fascinating.
You must thrill not just at the discovery of something which you haven't seen before and which, you know, comes up to the surface, literally in this case, after 1,000 years, but something that opens a new vista on how people lived and what they did. I mean, that must just be a constant excitement. I assume that day by day, you're discovering new things about the hoard. I mean, Fiona McFarlane asks, for example, can you tell whether any of the textiles were embroidered, and what in their fragile state, presumably, have they got on them? Where did it come from?
Well, that's going to be one of the focus of the research that's happening over the next 3 years. And we have a textile specialist who had previously worked as an embroiderer, Dr. Alexandra Makin. She'll be examining that material to look for exactly that type of information. That's one of the great things about the hoard. And again, I go back to what I was saying about there being multiple stories within it. The things within the vessel, again, get us away from that stereotype of the Viking warrior, the male stereotype of the Viking age. The contents of the vessel really look like there is a feminine aspect to them. And so getting the chance to explore that, getting to explore a new story is what is really exciting. You keep asking me about, you know, why things were there, what's the end goal, but actually it's the journey that is really interesting to me, and I'm hoping that that's what's going to be interesting to the visitors that come to the exhibition.
Well, these are the sorts of questions, if you answered with any certainty, no one would believe you, because they would say, how can you tell? So, I mean, you've got to admit that this is a journey. That's the thing. Somebody just asks, we're getting towards a conclusion now, but a couple of questions about the earth balls, the dirt balls there.
Oh, yeah.
Were they, you know, were they baked? Were they dried out? What do they tell us? Because they are, you know, unlike the beautifully embroidered carved bird or the embroidered textiles, they're not intrinsically of any value. Why are they there, do you think?
So they're so unusual as survivals. If you think about it, dirt would disappear very easily. If it got wet, it would dissolve. If it dried out too much, it would turn to dust. So they're like Malteser size, and you can see how they've been made almost like kids' plasticine. You know, they've been rolled together. And in the rolling, they have trapped bits of gold and tiny fragments of bone. And these particles within it can't be seen with the naked eye. So it's only something that the detailed analysis has shown us. But it tells us that they were rolled in an environment that contained gold and bone. And so it's something that chimes with this historical reference to earth relics. And there are very few examples of these earth relics that survive. We know that people visited Christian shrines, that they wanted to bring a little bit of the sacred places back with them. And this was the way they did it. So it opens up the possibility that that's what we have surviving in the hoard. And it's the lidded vessel that helps to create the conditions for those to survive. I've only found one other example of surviving earthen relics, and it's in the Vatican collection in Rome. And the early popes of Rome were interested in the holy places that they read about in the Bible. So they were getting earth from Bethlehem or the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. And so this allows us to pursue a theory, and it is only a theory at this point, but it's a real tantalizing one.
And that, Michael, just to end on this, is such an exciting prospect that each of these dirt balls might throw up, not another hoard, obviously, because if they're a size, maybe they were playing marbles with them, who knows? But anyway, just a little ball. But in there, you can have bone, you can have gold, you can have other metals that open up a whole new chapter and a whole new story.
Well, yes. Isn't it amazing that a little ball of earth can tell a story of a civilization?
Well, there we are. And this is, Martin, as people look forward to the museum opening in happier times, when the doors can be flung open and people will get in, as I say, generous sponsorship from Baillie Gifford, and the exhibition will be free to visitors, although I have no doubt people will be queuing around the block, and early booking is strongly advised. But it must be a matter of great excitement to researchers like yourself to think that people are going to be able to see these things, not just in some of the lovely images we've shown on the screen this evening, but in person, right in front of them, and go back 1,000 years.
Yeah, it's of interest to all sorts of people. I think it's not just academic researchers, although they have particular interests in the material, and especially because the material is so unusual. But I think it's the way that it captures all sorts of people's imagination is what's really great about this particular project.
Well, it is a matter of imagination, and it's been an absolute pleasure, Michael Hirst, a master of the imagination, to have you with us, progenitor of the Vikings, hugely successful worldwide series. And Martin, for all the work you've done on the Hoard and all the work that is to come, I'm sure everybody watching, and many hundreds have been, they will thank you for what you've done and wish you well in the future. The museum, I should say to all of you, is going to be in touch with a short survey that will help to shape future online programming, which of course is becoming more familiar to us in these difficult times. And that, I should say, will provide an opportunity for you to sign up to the museum newsletter, the newsletter of the National Museums of Scotland, which is, of course, a wonderful way to keep informed with events, but also a treasure trove, literally and metaphorically, of what the museum has, what it's planning, and when, above all, you can see the Galloway Hoard. So my thanks to all of you for tuning in, and to Michael Hirst and Dr. Martin Goldberg for joining us to discuss some of the wonders of the Galloway Hoard. May you all see it before too long. Thank you very much, and goodbye.